Yes, welcome to this very first episode of the Unspoken podcast. I am Paz, and you were just listening to the sounds of Liepins Jones. I'm going to leave a link to his work in the description of this podcast. It's been a minute since I made a recording for a podcast, probably since 2020 or 2021 with Open Flow, which I created with my friend Lauda, and it was broadcasting on Lower Tone radio station in Leicester. But now I am very happy to finally be able to create a platform which I can continue to learn, exchange, and build with my community. This platform is about remembering, reclaiming, and recentering stories of the African diaspora. In particular, the stories and traditions that may have been forgotten, lost due to colonization. Each episode will be infused with music, storytelling, and light academic discourse. Aside from this, there will be one episode a month where there will be an invited guest that will share their story and their practice. So without further ado, let's get into today's episode, which is about stories and oral traditions. Now, I've been working with spoken word poetry for about 10 to 15 years. It's the core of my artistic practice, and I've always perceived the difference between when I perform my poetry to when it's in written text. Now, don't get me wrong. You can't take anything away from written stories and how they give space for you to engage with your imagination, apply your voice within the story. But when you hear the words, the sound coming out of someone's mouth, there is an extra layer there that touches you, especially if you're physically in the same space. The tone of voice, what they decide to put emphasis on, the emotions that may come through at times. This communicates something about that person, that body, and the archive that it holds, what it has experienced, what has shaped it, and it begins to come into contact with your body. In that case, any aspect of oral traditions are the communications or records of our cultures within the archives of our bodies. I see the body as an archive, perhaps the most important one, but that's a topic for another episode. Let me give you a quick definition of oral traditions from page 54 of Methodology in African Prehistory. It states, oral tradition may be defined as being testimony transmitted verbally from one generation to another. Its special characteristics are that it is verbal and the manner in which it is transmitted. When reading this definition, the first thing that comes into my mind about the influences that I've had as a spoken word poet, which include hip hop, grime, reggae, and now capoeira, the songs that are within the practice. But I guess any music and any poetry in any form or genre that demonstrates some sort of storytelling shows us how instinctive it is that we do this across the board with the different manifestations of our cultures. One of the oldest forms of storytellers that predates the colonial period are griots. From the regions of former Mali Empire, which spanned across modern day countries like Senegal, Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea-Bissau, Gambia, Guinea, Northern Ghana. The griot is a West African historian, storyteller, praise singer, poet, musician that transmits the stories that preserve genealogies, historical narratives, and oral traditions of their people. But when you understand how African civilizations, as well as other indigenous civilizations that use oral traditions, have been heavily criticized with this way of recording history, it's not seen as legitimate, which then creates inequalities in how our histories are recorded. And at times, these records, these very few records that we have, are lost due to the violence and the displacements of those societies. I just want to quote from a transcript from this video by the Home Team History channel on YouTube. If you don't know about this channel, go check them out. They have a lot of content about the African diaspora as a whole. This video is specifically about the life of griots. So this is from minute 117. It says, griots are oral historians, praise singers, trained to recite the history, myths, cultural beliefs of a given kingdom or village. I believe the philosophical purpose of griots was a powerful one. One can simply read a book or a record, but reciting of history through music or poetry and griot culture was meant for the history to be intrinsically tied into the fabric of everyday life, becoming a part of popular culture. In other words, the history was ingrained in the minds of the average person. and can be seen as a function of their daily activities, not something that simply happened in the past. So this reveals to me the importance of music, art, and culture in shaping societies. I personally believe that even though we don't really get valued out here, but we know how important it is. We understand that power and ultimately that responsibility. If you have in one way or another been chosen as a custodian of such gifts, we know that they're powerful. We know that they're meaningful. I've also been practicing capoeira for the last 5 years. And so many songs that I would sing here in Europe really had no meaning until I went to Brazil. I wasn't able to actually integrate it into my being and the way that I lived life here. So you have songs in capoeira, words that derive from specific dialects in regions in Brazil, words about plants that grow in specific places, also particular activities like sitting by the sea or working, fishing, planting crops, picking cotton, or references to physical spaces like Mercado Modelo that has historical context on the transatlantic slave trade in Brazil. All of this hits different when you're actually in those spaces with those communities whilst they're sharing their stories firsthand and you're experiencing the aura of all of this for yourself. Then you realize that these songs are really not just songs. We're not just singing out here, but we're really retelling and reliving the everyday lives of those who practice capoeira. It is embedded in the music and it is intrinsically tied to the fabric of who they are and what they do, even till this day. How we preserve culture shapes our everyday lives. But how we engage with everyday life also shapes the way that we preserve culture and the values we deem important. And to pass this element of oral tradition from generation to generation in the last 100 to 200 years has probably been very difficult. It has, of course, manifested anyway, because like I said, the body is an archive. And what is unspoken can still be present no matter how much oppression, violence, and physical uprooting there has been. But that aspect of transmitting history, knowledge, and values through the voice is vital. And for that reason, it could be necessary for us to commit to engaging with practices that keep this essence of storytelling and oral tradition alive by being conscious of exactly what we are transmitting. What has been missing? What are the history and knowledge and values that give context to who we are and the shoulders that we stand on? We are the future ancestors. So what history and values do we want to preserve for future generations? And what are the tools that we are passing down to them to be able to create in a way that continues to feed back to the community as a whole? I do think we need to be mindful of this as we move forward with new technology, new intelligence, different ways of working. We should think about how we integrate the past, how we can maintain grounded. And this is a new understanding for me in my journey. And one of the reasons why I decided to create this platform when I began to realize that my voice is important. My voice is important. My story is important because it's a part of a bigger story. It's connected to other stories that add more nuance to the history of the diaspora, but also adds greater context to the human history of what it means to be human. I just want to end off by giving a quote from one of my favorite writers, author, theorist. I found out about her work when I started my master's in 2021, which was also the year that she transitioned. It has absolutely changed my life to read her work, to understand that it is actually possible to come to voice, to speak from the margins and create spaces for transformation, whether that's internally or externally. Her essay on choosing the margins as a space for radical openness, Bell Hooks, states, "Spaces can be real and imagined. Spaces can tell stories and unfold histories. Spaces can be interrupted, appropriated, transformed through artistic and literary practice." I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to me and what I have to say. And really, I can't wait to continue to go on this journey, learning together. I'll see you in the next episode.